Good evening, everyone. I am Lori Gardner. I am the president of Les Dames d'Escoffier DC Regional Chapter. So, welcome to our program this evening. Just a couple words if you are not familiar. We are a vibrant community of women in food, beverage, hospitality, and related industries. We're a nonprofit and we support women in our communities through various ways: scholarships, grants, education programs like these, and mentoring, and many other ways. So, just to tell you a little bit about our scholarships, we subsidize women through the years by helping to fund their culinary education. And then we have grants that provide financial assistance to nonprofit organizations in our community that promote community health, sustainable food practices, and culinary training, specifically geared to women, families, and children. Um, we've been around DC chapters, the second chapter that was formed. The organization started in New York. We're the second chapter, created in about 1981. So we've been around a long time, and we're growing. We have almost 200 members in the area. So, one of our premier education programs that we do every other year is an education symposium. It's open to our members and the public. And I'm going to call on our chair of this symposium, Bonnie Benwick, to tell you just a little bit about it because we would love you to join us. So I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie.
Thanks, Lori. Hi, everybody. Lots of familiar faces and some new ones. I'm happy to see you here. And thanks to Susan for hosting this chat while she recuperates from knee replacement surgery. Something maybe some of us have to look forward to someday, but she's coming along and she's a neighbor. So, as Lori said, the symposium's biennial. It's kind of, we call it a day long because it starts about 9 in the morning, but it's really over about 3 in the afternoon. So you still get a little bit of a day or evening to yourself. And we've got educational sessions, tastings. I'm really looking forward to it this year because it's at a new venue, very shiny, new. It's on the Gallaudet campus. I put the address in there, the Kellogg Conference Hotel. It's about a half mile from a metro stop. There's going to be free garage parking right next to the hotel itself. You can actually rent a room and stay there if you want to for a very reasonable rate. But these are panels and discussions put on by DOMS, featuring some of the best and most informative women in food, beverage, and hospitality in the DC area. We've got sessions on gut health. We've got sessions on low and no alcohol, the sort of trend, what's behind all the buzzwords. We've got a demo session, how to be a better bread baker at home. And our afternoon Goody Solomon, it's named for a former member, a founding member of this chapter, an afternoon session that really gets into the heart of the women who are making a difference in the DMV. Also, it just happens to be International Women's Day. I'm not going to go on too long, but we'll have some program about that too. A delicious lunch featuring Dom's recipes prepared by the hotel staff. So I'm going to put the link. I think Sheila already put the link in there. I'm going to put it in there again so that you have a chance to sign up. We've extended our early rates, and that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. We hope to see many of you there. It's going to be a great, great day. Now I want to introduce our program moderator, Susan Barocas. Susan's been a DC Dom since 2015. She's a writer, a chef, a cooking instructor, and she currently chairs our Global Culinary Initiative committee. She's passionate about healthy, reduced waste cooking and the wonderful diversity of global cuisines, which she focuses on primarily through the diversity of Jewish cuisines from around the world. So that's it for my intros. Thank you all. We're excited about tonight's program.
Great. Thank you, Lori, and thank you so much to all of you for being here. We are very excited. Just a few housekeeping things. Please remember to keep your mics muted, and we'll leave time at the end for questions, which I'm sure will be a good discussion. Also, if you keep your screen on speaker view, then you will be able to see the person who is speaking easily. Sheila's going to work on spotlighting, but it really helps if you do that on speaker view, which is in the upper right corner of your screen, used on a laptop, usually under view. So, okay, I'm very excited to get to know these women better tonight. I feel like this is a perfect discussion. It's near the end of Black History Month and on the cusp of Women's History Month. And so it's really wonderful timing. Let me first introduce Nina, who is a Ghanaian American entrepreneur. And she describes herself as a cultural curator, culinary ambassador, social justice warrior, and author. Through her organization, which is Dine Diaspora, Nina's on a mission to connect and amplify African American food, immigrant food culture, and experiences. She also has founded the Black Women in Food organization to assist and increase the visibility of Black women working in the food and beverage industry in the U.S. She's dedicated to establishing a more equitable food system centered on the African diaspora. And she is co-author with Alexander Smalls of the book, The Contemporary African Kitchen, Home Cooking Recipes from the Leading Chefs of Africa. So, Ozoz Sokoh, how is that? Sokoh, is that right? Close, okay. Is also known as the kitchen butterfly. She's a Nigerian food writer, food explorer, culinary anthropologist, and food historian, and she's passionate about food in its entirety. Cooking, eating, dreaming, researching, writing, photographing, and styling it. She calls herself a traveler by plate, which I just love that term. And she uses foodways, social, cultural, and economic practices related to the production and consumption of food to explore the world. Because, as she says, food is more than eating. She has organized events around Nigerian foodways, including the first World Jollof Day in 2017, and has an active blog. Ozoz's new book, Chop Chop, Cooking the Food of Nigeria, is available for pre-order now and officially on sale March 18th. Welcome and thank you so much for taking the time for today's program. We are honored and delighted to have you here, and we're going to dive right in with kind of a big question, or it's also a request. So when we say African cuisine, what does that mean? Because Africa, after all, is a continent. It's a huge continent with many diverse and distinct national and regional cuisines, and also village by village or town by town even, there's probably variations. Can you frame for us, as we begin our discussion, how we can or should think about this topic? So, and whoever wants to go first, go for it.
Okay, well, thank you, Susan, and thank you everyone for being here. It's nice to be in community with food lovers. When I think of African cuisine, I think about European cuisine and American cuisine. Do those definitions exist? Because I guess they would be parallel, right? So them all being continents. I tend to think that, yeah, there's definitely such a huge variation of inspirations, geographies, cultures, ingredients that you don't. African cuisine, it's a broad spectrum. It encompasses and envelopes a lot. And I'll stop there.
Okay, well, we'll
I
explore that
mean,
further.
yeah, I obviously you've noted it. It's vast. And one, thank you everyone for having us. It's rare that Ozoz and I are actually on a panel together, actually. So it's exciting to be on a panel together at this moment where we both have such a important contributions to the food world. I think even in thinking about the book that I co-authored with Alexander, we had to actually think of African food regionally as opposed to the whole breadth of the continent. And the reason why is because even within countries and even from city to city, there's so much diversity. There's so much differences in the way people, not just the ingredients they use, but maybe how even they experience those same ingredients in different ways and what they make of it. So in a way to translate that to the rest of the world, you have to find some sort of definition, as you're saying. So we chose to think of it regionally. And those regions, north, south, east, west, central. And then there's one beyond that, the diaspora. And I have grown up in the diaspora outside of Africa, and I consider myself as an extension of the very ingredients and the techniques that the foods on the continent themselves have been expressed through the world through my family and families like myself. And in that, so there it is, right? I think of it regionally, just to give it more context. And then beyond regionally, even regionally, there are so many connections across. So it is, I think to me, I embrace the idea that Africa as a continent is quite large, has various different foods that are, one, connect the regions and people and spaces, but then various variations that don't, requiring us to invest time and effort to actually dig deeper. And I love that about our continent.
And we'll dive into issues that you both raised at some point in our conversation. I would like to try to say something or have you say something about authentic, quote unquote, in relation to African cuisines. And I do think for me, like putting an S on it right now helps to explain a little bit or helps to illuminate that it is such a variety of cuisines. But how do we think about if a dish is authentic to any particular region of Africa? And how important is that word anyway to describing the food? Is it determined by ingredients, techniques, or other elements? So have at it.
You came right, you started us hard.
I did,
You like, what's your favorite
everybody's all
food?
fresh and happy to be here.
Ozoz, you want to start?
Sure. I think authenticity for me is layered. There is my personal identity and relationship with food. There is my familial relationship with food. There is the broader community. So I kind of think of it as spheres of almost like rings, right? And it, I am a Nigerian who's lived in the UK, the Netherlands, and Canada. I have raised my 3 teenage children in a variety of countries. I have adapted to finding ingredients that are similar to those that I use in Nigerian cuisine while living abroad. And my identity is kind of connected to the ways that I encounter these ingredients outside of my home country. Like, I've sometimes used Indian shamagaz, which is similar to Nigerian egusi seeds, to make egusi soup. That's authentic, unique, and personal to my experience and my understanding of how I approximate the flavors of home. I think language is also an important component of that. So if I make a dish that I know is a variation on the classic or the accepted or the Nigerian way of doing it, then I make sure that the language that accompanies my writing or sharing of that dish expresses its proximity or not to the origins, right? So for me, it's there's respect at the heart of it. There is language that does an effective job of communicating what it is. And then there's also the personal level. So I don't think that authenticity means always fit, like fitting a specific defined thing, because, as we've expressed and we shared, there's such variation across the cultures, subcultures, and cuisines that what's considered authentic to one region might not be considered authentic in another, right? So there's a very personal definition to it, I believe.
I totally agree with that. I think when I think about authenticity, one of the things that always comes to mind is origin. I think whenever we are grappling with authenticity, we're grappling with the ideas of origin and tradition and how they are honored. And when we grapple with it the most is when we feel like those two things are not being honored. And to what Ozoz said, I believe that you can be authentic to yourself, but dishonor a culture, a people, and that is where authenticity often becomes a struggle. But I think we travel, and in the book itself, because we feature so many chefs and culinarians from the continent, one of the things that we never use the word authentic, because I think the idea of authentic almost has to have you negotiate between what I do personally versus what is expected or known about my culture and my people. And so instead, we ask them to bring their selves today as what shows up for them, so that they don't have to feel confined to being authentic to those things that they have to grapple with. I have lived outside of Africa. I've lived also in Ghana, but the majority of my experience is outside of it. And so I cannot really honor that word in those ways in which it's defined and expressed and causes conflict almost. And so I honor that, and it's who I am. And the expressions of what African food looks like doesn't have to always adhere to the strictness of what the cultural expressions are. However, when I think of authenticity, what has to remain and what people have to respect is the origins. I really believe that if something has grown out of a people, a place, even if they don't own it, and what I mean by ownership is someone can say, well, you know, this particular, like okra doesn't come from this particular region in Africa, or coffee doesn't, but it's the expression of the people, the ownership, the pride. That to me is authenticity in how it's expressed. So very complex kind of relationship with it. But I do think that in the totality of when we talk about authenticity, it's truly about origins and expressions and who feels that deep connection with that particular food or way that that food is used.
It sounds like it's intent also plays
Yes.
into that very much.
Absolutely. The honoring of, and the personal intention in cooking a food, using a food, and then how you honor the origins is really, I think, important when I think about that.
Mm. So let's go a little further into this idea of what happens when food travels, which is what we've started touching on. We know that recipes and ingredients have always crossed borders, and travelers, merchants, immigrants. And one of the things, there's a lot to unpack here, because one of the things I'd like to talk about is where and how we see African ingredients and cuisines, dishes showing up in American foodways, and how that all happened. One example, of course, is jollof rice, I think, of this process. Um, but there's a lot to unpack. So maybe we could at least talk about these recipes crossing borders and foodways, particularly into the US, and particularly how the food got here, the ideas got here, how it's carried out, how it's expressed today. Where do we see it?
Yeah, I would, obviously food travels with people, right?
Right.
Food travels with people, and to the context of the US, we can't talk about African food without talking about American slavery, and the ways in which Africans came to the US initially and retained practices and their culture through food, the extension of which is what manifests now as African American cuisine. Oftentimes, Southern cuisine as a whole is very much influenced by that. And then, many years, generations later, you have immigrants like myself and my family bringing elements of their culture in that present day to continue to influence what I think American food overall is and can be. Jollof rice, you mentioned, important to me as a Ghanaian American, and every day, every week we were eating jollof rice in my household. I think the interesting thing about how food shows up on a broader scale is more about time, like why. Like, why is it at a certain point we see rice rising? And it's because of the people. The people continue to create it, continue to find ingredients to make it, and then amplified it. But it's all happening at the same time where perhaps our culture is being more seen, where we have more ability, we have more money, where we have more access to opportunities. And then our food also shows up. But it's not overnight, right? And so I see there's many layers of why I think, African food, I think right now is also having that kind of journey overall. Jollof rice, I think, opened the doorway. And here we are with, the opportunity for Ozoz to have a book, and for myself to have the opportunity to have a book that documents these cuisines.
So well expressed and shared. And like you, jollof rice is like a staple in my family growing up. And I guess there are a couple of things that I think about when I reflect on recipes traveling, transcending borders. One is that beyond the recipes, one of the things that enslaved West Africans brought was not just the physical labor of working on the plantations, but intense and really impressive intellectual contributions, right? And I think that's often lost in this couching of the physicality of enslavement. It was beyond that. Enslaved Africans were poached from specific regions for their knowledge of growing rice and farming and working in swamp-based systems. And in some ways, it reminds me about modern immigration patterns, right? a government announces that they want people who have these skills and talents, and those are the only people who are granted, the permission to emigrate or immigrate. So that's one. The other thing is just how strong, I almost think of it as DNA, as kind of primordial connections with foodways, and whether and things that transcend history and even geography. So take smoke, for instance. Every culture has some kind of rice or carb dish that has a crispy, toasty, caramelized bottom that, whether that's Persian tadig, or Nigeria, we call it bottom pot, or Spanish socarat. Like you have that almost smoky thing that we all kind of gravitate towards. There's a red rice dish in practically every major culture and cuisine. Does it have its roots in West African jollof? Maybe, maybe not. But are there connections and threads that we can kind of see and establish? So I think that it's just so fascinating to me to see what I think of as all the ways we're connected in spite of our differences, that whether or not we have shared history or religion or even similar geographies, they're these culinary elements that kind of shape the recipes that travel with ease. And it's why some recipes, so take hibiscus. In Nigeria, we use it to make zobo, and in Ghana, zobolo and hachwa de Jamaica. Like, that's an ingredient that has global expression. And so we can, there's a sense of, oh, I recognize this ingredient, like it seems like there are these groups of ingredients and shared things that exist beyond the specificity of cultures. I find that fascinating.
It truly is. And it's amazing that there are similarities in food, such as these rice dishes, even though the local ingredients, what's grown locally, what's, isn't necessarily all the same. Why is there a rice dish? Well, almost everyone can grow rice. If you're living in a cold climate, you're not going to have, oranges and things like that, in the middle of winter. So it's not as ubiquitous as you get like a rice dish, which almost everyone can make. By the way, we might want to backtrack and have one of you describe jollof rice in case anyone doesn't know what we're talking about.
Well, I think of jollof rice as a seasoned red rice dish that exists everywhere across West Africa, with variations depending on the country, culture, influence. For instance, in Anglophone West Africa, we tend to use long grain rice, whether that's parboiled or not. And in more Francophone countries, they tend to use medium to short grain rice. We typically have a source. Well, the origin of jollof rice is Senegambian. So it comes from like the 14th, 15th century region of Wolof, which was a state. And that region, early on in history was known as the Grain Coast. They were farming rice, barley, and other grains and cereals. And it's thought that the early versions of jollof rice was made with barley, and it's attributed to a lady called Pemba Mbaye, who was a cook in St. Louis, which is the capital of Senegal, modern day Senegal. And she had to make a dish. There was no barley. She used rice. At the time, tomatoes, onions, peppers, and all of these ingredients were featuring in cooking and cuisine. And the Senegalese version, chebujen, which is the grandmother, grandfather of jollof rice everywhere else, was birthed. And you kind of see, it's this vibrant orange red rice, and different expressions. In Senegal, it is usually accompanied with like chunks of vegetable and delicious seafood. Whereas in Nigeria, the vegetables aren't visible on the plate, even though they used to be pre 1960. You find recipes from historic Nigerian cookbooks that featured the vegetables, but post independence and oil and gas wealth, the vegetables disappeared, kind of made their way into a salad that's served on the side as opposed to cooked in the rice dish. So yeah, you should definitely try it if you haven't, and try from different countries.
Ozoz, your next book needs to just be on jollof.
Nina, is there anything you want to add to this discussion of jollof
Only
rice?
that the Ghanaian jollof is better. I'm just
I'm tempted to agree with you because I went to Ghana in 2011, and we went to a village in Stilts called Nzulezu. And I'm pained that my camera died and I don't have any visual evidence, but we had one of the best jollof rice dishes I've ever had in my life. The twist, it was cooked by a Spanish chef. So I don't know. But
But on
anyhow,
Ghanaian ground.
Ghanaian jollof, I think there's room. I don't even think there needs to be competition because they're so different. There's room for all of them.
What I love about the idea of the competition, so what the banter, that comes up is who makes the best jollof, because of Ozo's great historical references about it's all over West Africa at this point, originating in Senegal. But what I love about the idea of this competition, so I don't know what years it was, maybe 2015, 2016, there was a craze around sort of who made the best jollof rice that went global, right? Everywhere. And that's, to me, one of the catalysts of why jollof becomes well known in other places. People want to try it. I don't necessarily care for the banter itself, right? Because who cares who's better? It's what you like. And if it's better, it's probably sometimes just based on the cook, honestly. However, what I love about what that did was really, it was a mechanism for African food to be shared around the world. And it was fun. I think if you were at that time, it was fun. I think anyone that takes it too seriously, it gets not fun. It's like, who cares? We just want to eat our jollof. If I go to Nigeria, I'll eat that. If I go to Senegal, I'll eat that. I do love the Senegalese one. It's exceptional above all. But the idea that such something that was fun and banter had become such globalized conversation really was one of the marketing tools for African food. And that, I think, I love thinking back on that as, okay, the reason why a lot of people even know about that conversation or know about, who makes the best jollof rice is because of that global conversation that West Africans were having within themselves.
And it was sparked by what is called Jollof Gate, because Jamie Oliver, the British chef, made a version of jollof rice that jollof lovers did not recognize. It had garnishes and ingredients on the plate that were foreign to people's eyes, and ingredients listed that were foreign to their palates. And I think that really, there was a sense of reclamation, there was a sense of identity, but there was also a little bit of confusion because people loved Jamie, and so it's like, yeah, what are you doing, bro? Like, and I think that was, it was an important moment for definitions and for recognitions of the variety of jollof rice that exists. I remember, as someone who had grown up reading a lot of Jamie Oliver cookbooks and cooking from them, just being like, oh, research is important and paying homage to origins and acknowledging your version. And it comes back to this thing of authenticity.
Yeah.
I think Jamie might not have received as much flack if he had clearly said, I had jollof rice and at home I had these ingredients and I came up with
Right.
a version that references XYZ, but it was a very clear statement about this is jollof rice. And people were like, this is not my jollof rice, I beg your pardon. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was interesting. It brought out the camaraderie across West Africans and other Africans. And I think it raised the profile of the different types of jollof rice. So
Mm-hmm.
all things work together for good, I guess.
Mm. And I think so often chefs kind of feel like they need to put their mark on a dish. And it's very important to me in my work also to acknowledge sources, to acknowledge where things come from, influences, to acknowledge changes you're making. Be open about it. There's nothing wrong with it. And I just think that it's something, unfortunately, that gets lost sometimes in our modern TV, etc., TikTok culture. So with what you've been saying, it leads me to ask, how can we become better acquainted with African food and foodways? Because of restaurants and many of us are familiar with Ethiopian food, for its example, and some with West African. Here in DC, we have both. But how do we develop our knowledge, our palates for African cuisines? Can you all suggest resources, an approach to learning and cooking various African foods, including, and you had talked about substituting Ozoz, including how we source and substitute ingredients? What do you suggest? How do we go about this kind of enormous task?
Many ways, many ways. The cookbooks. Chop Chop Cooking the Food of Nigeria, African Contemporary Kitchen. Cookbooks are a great way. I think fundamentally though, it's in sparking people's interest and it is creating awareness. I like to begin with finding points of connection.
Mm,
So a dish that I can describe that is similar to something else that people might be familiar with. I think there's work to be done with libraries, schools, organizations. So thank you for having us. But even discussions. I think social media can be a powerful tool
mhm,
in sharing daily practices, ritual foods, feasts on occasion and things like that.
mhm,
I recently did a series on my Instagram where I talked about how I source ingredients for Nigerian cuisine and where I find them.
mhm,
And it's something that's always been of interest to me. Like, where can I get this food in the most proximal way?
mhm,
Um, like I want to be able to just walk down the street to my next door grocery store next door and find ingredients. And there's so many ingredients that I found in my regular grocery stores, whether that is on the shelves or in the deep freezer or in the bakery. And so I kind of put together a list and I'm working on creating like a spreadsheet or a gallery that says,
oh,
and I'm kind of thinking about what the best way to do that is. Like, should I say, so the way that I did it on in one of my videos was saying, here's what you can get at a regular grocery store. But if you go to the international aisle, you want to look in the South and Central American section for corn flour. This
mm,
is two words, not okay, because in Britain, corn flour is cornstarch, which was so confusing to me because when I was writing recipes for my book, I was looking for finely ground corn, and that is corn flour, 2 words. And it was just like all these different terms. But I went to my grocery store. I could find cornmeal in the baking section, and I was pretty sure they had corn flour. I found the corn flour in the South American section in a different aisle, right? Very different from cornmeal. I was looking for black sesame seeds in a Chinese store. I found black sesame seeds in 3 different aisles. In the tea aisle, I found ground black sesame seed powder. In an aisle with corn and cereal, I found whole black sesame seeds. In another place, I found toasted black sesame seeds. And I was like, why don't you guys all have them in one particular place? So there's stuff in your regular grocery stores. And there's so many people to follow online. There's so many ways to access that information if you want. The way that I approach new cultures and cuisines is I go with what is it that catches my attention? What is it that I'm fascinated by? And then I find a restaurant to at least get a taste of, just to get an experience and a sense of what the culture and cuisine is about, and then explore further, read more. It has to be a combination of kind of like a theory, kind of setting the scene, and the practice of eating and experiencing the ingredients and food.
I think for me, I agree with everything that Oza said, and I will not tackle ingredients because I just get, I'm not even a good grocery store shopper. I need that guide actually, Oza.
I did work on it yesterday, and I will continue. I'll share when it's done.
What I would say is, I truly believe what you just said. To me, getting introduced to any food is about the connection, and really connection to its people. Most of course, like restaurants are a great way to begin that journey. The other way is travel too. I think as we begin to, as there's more access to recipes and all of these things that are now becoming more global with African food, I think it's an opportunity to go and see, go and taste, go and try. Some of the best ways I've been able to deeply get to know food is through its people. Going to Kenya, going to Uganda. I will always talk about Uganda because it's not just the food is one thing, right? You know about it, you read, you make it, but it was the fruit that got me in Uganda. I can't make fruit. I cannot make it. You can't make it. You can only go and get it and taste it. It's some of the freshest fruit I have had in my entire life. I don't think it tastes like any fruit anywhere else. I think they have the best fruit in the world, unmatched. And so I think Ghana's pineapples from Cape Coast region, the best pineapples in the world. And those things cannot be expressed anywhere. There's no substitute. And then on top of that, to me, is like, I remember these places the most. It's because of the people that drew me to these experiences. There's nothing you can take away from going to Bangladesh and walking markets with someone and sitting down and going to one of the finest bakeries. Those are memories tied to it. And I think so often our food experiences, because of the accessibility of information, of videos and all that, are detached from the experiences that strengthen the idea of what it means to actually connect. And I've centered my work, Dine Diaspora is all about connection. We didn't start Dine Diaspora because of the food. We started Dine Diaspora because of the connection of people through food. And so I can never really, and that resonates in my personal experiences. As I've gotten to know, you mentioned Ethiopian food. I didn't come to Ethiopian food through Ethiopian food. I came to Ethiopian food through its people, through the people in here in DC that bring their culture into the restaurants that they have. And so I think for so often, and I think a lot of the challenges we have in the food space, whether it's race, sexism, all these issues are because people are trying to experience food without connection to its people.
Mhm.
And we need to center it, the people, and find the humanity and the connections within the people as we experience food.
Mm.
100%.
So
I
true.
really appreciate that. Restaurant. One of the things, so when I started thinking about the concept of traveling by plate, it was through both cookbooks, but also through um, TV series, films, and things like that. I have been to places in my head, on my couch, that I haven't yet physically, put my feet. And I think the ability there's just so many mediums and ways to share food. And I love that we're embracing so many of them, though some to extremes in terms of turning these places into like over visited and over touristed
Mm.
destinations. But traveling by plate for me is all about how do I experience another culture and cuisine through reading, through experiencing it without being physically there as well. And I think that accessibility is a huge thing. I teach food and tourism studies, and I remember once, talking with my students. We were looking through. Do you remember the ViewMasters?
Mhm.
Yeah, so I bought a few ViewMasters, and we're looking through like tourism reels, but also looking at virtual reality tours of destinations around the world as a possibility of people who may not physically be able to go to those places, at least getting to experience them somehow. So it's just, yeah. Food is a great medium and tool for both connection, but also getting to know and identify with other cultures and places.
Yeah, I mean, when you go to a new city, when I go to a new city, any place in the world, what I want to do is go to the market first, right?
Yes.
I want to go to the farmer's market, the
Yes.
outdoor market, whatever, and visit how as many as I can and taste the food, and you talk to the people, and you know, there's various opportunities in different cities to do this. One also, by the way, might be festivals. Like in DC, we have some festivals
Mm-hmm.
that people can go to that feature different cultures and cuisines. And for me, that's a really wonderful way to get a taste, literally, of being in that culture. Um,
100%.
yeah,
I can't go to a place without going to a grocery store. Like I will fight tooth and nail to get to a grocery store and get to a market. And just
absolutely.
I want the experience of seeing how everyday people live, like what's on the shelves. What are people buying who aren't foodies in the sense that, like we are obsessed with. And just getting a sense of what those classic everyday ingredients are. I love it, which means my house is overrun with things.
I wanted to just add that's
Yes.
I love well, as you know, the grocery store is not my favorite place. But when I do go to other countries, I get my souvenirs from the grocery store.
Mm.
Ah,
So instead of, yes, I'll get little food trinkets or drinks that are unique to that place. And that's what I'll give instead of like, magnets.
I love
I'm
it.
with you. I think food gifts are one of the best thing we can bring back for people to share any place. So, all right, so just a very practical two questions that are very practical. One is if you had a magic wand and you could pick two or three ingredients that you think would help incorporate African foodways into the US, that should be in every market, what would they be? That's the first question. So,
Nina, you can go ahead.
Oh my God. The person that doesn't even like the grocery store.
I know, I'm thinking, oh, should I ask this? But just think of an
Oh my
ingredient.
God. Ozoz, you better stop playing with me.
Okay,
I need time.
okay, sorry, sorry, love, sorry. I think for me, I'd definitely say yam, which is not sweet potato.
Right.
It's a different botanical crop and different anatomy, different size. But I definitely say yam because it's versatile. Boil it, pound it. You can treat it like you would a potato,
Mm.
but that's definitely yams. They're indigenous to the continent. Um, the second one is gari, which is a cassava granule that has its roots in the Amazon and came to the continent and particularly to West Africa and Nigeria through returnee enslaved people. Well, the Portuguese brought it in like the 15th century, but the knowledge of processing the specific varieties of cassava wasn't brought at the time. And cassava, as you know, it can be the skin can be toxic if consumed raw. So
Mm.
there are really considerations in how it's processed. But Nigeria is now the world's greatest producer of cassava, grower of cassava, exporter. And Gary is just one of those things that I fell in love with when I was 9. I didn't eat as a child. It's really weird that my whole life is all about food and being consumed with it. But I didn't eat as a child, which was traumatic for my parents. But Gary was one of those things that I enjoyed. And it's you can enjoy it kind of the way you would cereal. It has the texture of cornmeal, but it's completely cooked by the time it makes its way to the shelf. So you can actually eat it out of hand. And you can have it with like water, or so you can eat it wet, but you can also eat it dry. So for the last week, for instance, I get into these food funks, and my current one is avocados. So I cut an avocado in half, salt it, and then fill put Gary in the center. And Gary's really crunchy. But it was something my parents always did. So you end up with this really crunchy, slightly sour Gary with the salted avocado. I've been having that like once or twice a day for the last week and a half. I feel like I'm coming to the end of this current craving. But yes. So yam, Gary, and then for drinks, I would definitely say hibiscus, like zobo. Um, yeah, those are three things I think
Mhm.
I would suggest.
And do you find yam in most of the various cuisines around Africa? Because from what I know, it seems like it's really around in a lot of the different foodways.
At least West Africa, probably Central Africa as well, but across the Caribbean islands as well,
Ah,
you'll also
Yeah.
find it.
mm, okay.
First of all, yes to all of that. I was also going to say cassava, the yuca that we have here. How do I say, the preservation methods that they use to have it on our shelves makes it not worth experiencing for me. It doesn't even look the same to me. So, but first one would be palm oil, the red palm oil that we have coming from the palm nut tree. I definitely think it's something that we all could use in various ways. You can make stews, use it as oil, but a thicker oil, and it has a taste of its own, which
Mhm.
to me is great because that means I have to do less work on the other dish. On the rest of the dish, you put your palm oil in there, you've gone somewhere. The other thing I would say too is rather than just the ingredients, I would take the ingredients that Ozo's made and I would have more pre-made and ready to eat items which we're finding there's a lot of companies doing now, but it's still I think it's in its infancy. I do think in the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot more of that, more, I think, yeah, more African food in general. I think this has been relevant to the whole continent, in the frozen food aisle. I just think we've always been in especially for American culture, a quick access food experiences, and African food has not been translated into that arena. And therefore, the access by the majority of Americans, and I don't think that everything has to be for majority of people to be coveted either, but the ease of even growing up and being able to heat something up is a entry point that I think we could do to several African dishes. So for me, it's also thinking about what can be taken and accessible. And I mean, like jollof in the frozen food aisle, we all know of it. Why not just pick it up? Or maybe not frozen, but pre-made to an extent, and then you take 10 minutes to make the rest of it or something. So those are some of the things that I think a lot about, that if I had quick access to, would change my life. I would probably go to the grocery store more.
You would buy those pre-made dinners.
Well, I hope that's coming.
Yeah, and yeah, that is. I think we're on the wave. But so many people have been doing great work. And I think now more than ever, our foods are available online. You can order. They are in major grocery stores, beyond just like couscous. And I think there's a little bit of like, just kind of searching for some things, but they are accessible more than ever to of the American population.
I just popped a link in the chat of a Canadian Nigerian company that makes jarred jollof sauces, and I have two daughters at university. They've refused to learn anything I can make. They're like, Mama, you can make that. I'm not doing it. But I got them these jars of jollof sauce, and my kids they're not snobs, but because I've been cooking and they're really good eaters, they're like, sometimes they're picky about what they try. Both of them loved jollof now, which is the sauce. I popped the link in the chat, and have confidently cooked jollof rice for themselves. Like so many times, and it's been a game changer for sure. So I guess that, the more these things are accessible and on grander scales, then the more access there is.
It seems that perhaps African food is the final frontier, in a sense, of cuisines from a continent. It's like the final one to cross over into everyday food. I don't know. I'm not speaking about Europe because I don't know, but in the US, I would say, and maybe Canada, it's starting. Would you agree? It seems like there's work to be done, but it's starting. Would you think that that's accurate?
Yeah, I'll always say I grew up on African food in America, right? So I never felt like it was a next frontier. And so for me, and many Africans that grew up on their foods at home, people have been doing it anyway. Right. And so, but when I think about the journey it's had beyond beyond my own family and the people that hold the culture because it's who they are, I think it's something that it seems emerging. Yeah. And to me, that's fine, because that's the journey that it's going on, and that's the moment that we're in. But I think for me, it's always been not emerging, right? Because we found ways to do it, and we found ways to sell it. There's, African food stores have always been somewhere that we've had to go on top of going to the grocery store that everyone goes. We always had to make 2 trips. Went to the grocery store that was for everyone, and then we went to the African grocery store for the other pieces, and then at home my parents might fusion dishes. You know, I always talk about like what Thanksgiving was like or what Christmas was like, because my parents had to always make sure that I could go to school and talk about Thanksgiving similarly to my American peers, um, but also have this my cultural element, because also they had to enjoy their food too, but also not lose the fact that I have Ghanaian heritage, you know. And so the sort of immersion that always happened is normal to me, but I don't find that other places. I don't find that, but it's something that, you know, has always been a part of who I am, how I grew up, and what I expect in my food experiences. I think for right now, the moment we're in, what I'm so excited about is the global documentation piece. I think whether, you know, you've known about it or not know it or experienced it or not experienced it, that idea that we are documenting it for global reach. Ozoz and I were talking about Chop Chop and how, and I'll let you talk about how she's made sure that it is going to be able to be accessible globally. Similarly to the Contemporary African Kitchen is so critical. And why, and I'll say why is that oftentimes documentation, it has ownership in different spaces, meaning just for the African audience, just for the European audience, just for XYZ American audience. These two books get to not only be accessed by those outside of the continent, but those within the continent who are often not having access to the documentation of their own foods.
That's a whole topic right there about the documentation of your own foods.
I think it's just really, I love to see it. Whether that is written work, whether that's video work, it's fascinating to see the volume. And I think that's definitely one of the things that will continue to shape how we create awareness of these cultures and cuisines. And as Doreen says, it's a shock that we're still talking about its emergence when this underpinned, you know, African food and African techniques and West African practices and ingredients in many extents actually sustained and nourished people for hundreds of years. But, you know, we're moving forward. And so it's just, yeah, we continue to do all of the bits, and it's everything, right? It's not just one practice or one aspect. It's the writing, it's the eating, it's the talking, it's the ingredients being available in your regular grocery store. It's creating awareness, it's collaborations. It's spaces like this where we can converse, we can talk, we can think through a variety of things. So it's basically, as my mom would say, it's all hands on deck, essentially.
That's a great place. We'll have to transition because we do want people to be able to ask questions. But I just want to say thank you both so much. I feel like we have scratched the surface in a sense. Like, okay, this is part one. You know, we're going to need to do this again and again because there is a lot to talk about and a lot to learn. And I'm very appreciative of both of you being open and honest and sharing with us your experiences. If anyone wants to ask a question, please use the hand raise. And we'll get, you can also switch to gallery. By the way, if to raise your hand, you can look at the bottom of your screen. It's usually in reactions. And I'll see if there's anyone who wants to turn on their mic and ask Ozoz or Nina anything. And if you go to gallery view, you'll see other people on the Zoom with you. So Are there any questions?
I have a
Okay,
question.
Sheila, go for it.
So at one point in my life, I was directing after-school cooking programs at the middle school level, and half of my students were West Africans, recent immigrants from West Africa.
Mm.
I was surprised at how spicy they liked their food.
That's not a global thing. I keep saying to people that I'll let you finish, but that's not that. I don't think that that's a global West African thing, though.
All right. And if you want to know where chilies originated, it's South America.
Yep.
But you know, with trade, it goes everywhere, like you say. My question is, do you think that mothers who are eating chilies while they're pregnant kind of get some of the capsaicin into the fetus as it's developing? How soon does a baby start to eat spicy food?
That's interesting for me. Like I said, I have three teenagers. My oldest daughter, her love for spices, I can't even like when I cook for her, I can't eat it comfortably. My second daughter does no pepper at all, so no chilies, none whatsoever. My son is somewhere in the middle. What I found since moving to North America is that I find the chilies way hotter than the chilies in Nigeria. So in
Mm.
Nigeria, I feel like the chilies are bred for or raised for flavor, not heat. Here, I want to cook something, I will use like a literal sliver from a whole Scotch bonnet or habanero. In Nigeria, I would throw in three or four. I'm
Mm.
so shocked at that. But I always say to people that I don't think that this love for spice is universal universally Nigerian or West African. I know many people who do not tolerate high levels of heat. But I've also been to a Thai restaurant and almost had the roof of my mouth blown off because I underestimated. Like when they said it was hot, I was like, look, please, I'm Nigerian. I can handle it. I could not. It was a restaurant in New York called Soothe, Soothr. I was stunned. So I don't think it's yeah, I don't think it's everyone. I'd say that for sure.
Mm.
So what I did, because I also had students who couldn't tolerate spicy heat at all, I just made sure to have plenty of hot sauce for the people that liked it that way. And then they could, you know, fix their food the way they wanted it.
Mm.
Does that resonate with you, Ozoz?
Because in Nigeria, it doesn't. So no, I, I don't think Nigeria is a hot sauce culture. We had hot sauce
I'm,
in the fridge growing up because of my dad ate everything, but it's a different, hot sauce, typically the way that I've encountered it abroad, has a lot of vinegar, there's a sour, sweet. Nigerians don't really dabble with sour
Mm.
in a vinegary sense as an everyday component of dining. So
All right. Thank you. Kenya.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Ladies, amazing, amazing, amazing. I have my copy. Do you all see it?
yes.
Yes, I love this book. I brought it for myself for Valentine's Day. And
Oh,
I haven't been able to put this book down. I can't wait to delve into these recipes. I'm also the founder and CEO of Lillian Southern Box Catering, where we create elevated Southern inspired comfort food and desserts. I have traveled to Ghana twice, once in August of 2024, and just recently in January of 2025. I am planning to travel back in May and launch my curated coffee and tea boxes. I want to highlight coffee vendors in Ghana. I am planning to launch these products on Shopify, where they will be offered globally. I want to know if either of you can share with me, what advice would you give to an entrepreneur who is also looking to bring social impact as I launch my products? Thank you.
That's 100% Nina.
One, I mean, go girl, like you're doing amazing. Like, I love it. Continue. If there's anything I cherish a lot is bridging the diaspora. And so that's exactly what you're doing with your work. If there's anything I can say to you about social impact, it would be one, you're already doing it. You're going to the source. And what I would say is never lose the stories of the people and connect your sort of, how do I say, your profits to their growth. I think if there's a thread that could be made there, never detach that from your own. As you succeed, how do you ensure that as you profit, you're not just giving money, but you're reinvesting in the place and space where you began, or expanding there, building the skills, whatever it is. Tie your success and growth to theirs as well. Right now, Ghana in particular is going through economic, I would say, turmoil. While it's a beautiful country, while it's a peaceful country, people, because of that, people don't often see that like the value of their money is depreciated. Access to work and jobs is very much a struggle for even people with high levels of education and skills. And so as you're creating opportunity by investing and making sure that your business is rooted there, that to me is a way in which those issues get alleviated. And so the more and more you're able to build your business with those ties in the communities, is really going to not only be great for you where you're at, but also for the people themselves. Never detach it from the people themselves. Always think first about the people. One thing I do in my work all the time is ask myself, who is it for? Who's here? Who's missing? And if you can continue to ask yourself those questions as an entrepreneur, that social impact will always be an authentic, true thread. It's not something you make up. It's not something that becomes a detached. It will always be there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
So
Congratulations.
brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Nina.
Yes.
And Kenya, much success.
Thank you. Thank you.
And also, Kenya, you might check out the symposium, because there are sessions about entrepreneurship and social impact. And I think
yes, I planned on attending. Thank you.
We'll
yes,
you
now I know I'm going to attend. Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So we've reached our time limit. I want you to look in the chat if you're interested real quickly. There are links while I'm still talking to register for the symposium, for different places to access food. And also, in response to Drew's question about a local company in Montgomery County, Maryland, that makes packaged jollof rice, Wendy was able to answer that it's AMAC Foods International. And she says it's easy and tasty jollof rice, and they make a mild and a spicy version. And she finds a mix of the two works well for her, which is really great. I can't thank you both enough. Really illuminating discussion, and we look forward to learning more with you and from you. And Nina, I know you'll be at the symposium. And Ozoz, I hope that we can in the future have you in DC. That would be so. Oh wait, June.
Yes. Looking forward to it.
So in June, it looks like Ozoz will be at Bold Fork Books, and Les Dames will be able to co-sponsor that event. So we're looking forward to it very much. And I thank all of you so much.
There's one hand up, Pat.
Susan, could you quickly tell us the dates of the symposium? Somehow I missed that.
March 8th, Saturday, March 8th.
Thank you.
Sure. We will see many of you there, I'm sure. But thank you all so much for being here tonight, for your interest and enthusiasm, along with Ozoz and Nina. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It's been amazing. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.